and glory of God, who by the word and through the Spirit creates, redeems, and sanctifies us all. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning. For those of you I have not had an opportunity to introduce myself to, my name is Kym Lucas. I am spouse to Mark. I am mom to Jaden, Kaya, Ronan, and Croy. And it is my honor and my privilege to serve as Bishop of the Episcopal Church in Colorado. And it is good to be here again at St. Luke's on my annual bishop's visitation. I visit every church in this diocese, all 96 worshiping communities once every 3 years, and it is good to be back. I am now at that phase in my ministry where I'm making the second circuit, and it's really very cool. This Epiphany season is always one I think that we sometimes give short shrift. One, because it happens in the time of year where, at least here in Colorado, we get -5 degrees when we wake up in the morning. But Epiphany is powerful because it is the season where we talk about how Christ's light is made manifest in the world, how the light of Christ is spread from beyond a tiny little community in the Middle East to the entire world. And I think we as church sometimes forget how amazing that is. And I love that we have this passage from John. You see, in John's gospel, you all know those words from John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Unlike Matthew and Luke, John's gospel doesn't start with people. It starts with the cosmos. It starts with the universe. It starts with this understanding that our God, our living God, is eternal. That our God existed before this earth existed. That our God did this amazing, crazy thing because the Word became flesh. So John doesn't even start on the level of creation or the level of humanity. John starts with God's omnipotence, God's eternalness coming down to become flesh. And so John starts on this great cosmic level, but it gets granular really, really fast. In fact, the first chapter of John ends with Jesus calling disciples. And one of my favorite disciple call stories that I relate to a little bit is when Philip says to Nathanael, "You have to come see this guy. I think he might be the Messiah. He's from Nazareth." And Nathanael's like, "Does anything good come out of Nazareth?" This sort of skepticism that happens. And I think that's intentional on this evangelist's part. And then we get to the second chapter where we have Jesus' first miracle. Jesus' first miracle isn't casting out demons in John's gospel. It isn't healing someone sick. Jesus' first miracle, if you can call it that, is at a wedding. He's at a wedding. Now weddings happen all the time over all cultures. Weddings are not unique in the world. There's this whole tradition of people joining themselves together in marriage for political alliances, for land grabs, for sharing of resources. Weddings are not particularly special. And I think that's the point this evangelist is trying to make for us. You see, there is this grandness of God's glory. There is this grandness of God's glory, but God is also glorified in the ordinary, in the mundane, in the everyday, in the banal. I remember when my spouse and I had decided we were going to get married. I was fresh out of seminary. We were paying off student loans. We were broke. And we knew that if we were going to have a wedding, we were going to have to be the ones to finance said wedding. And so back then, we didn't have Google. We couldn't just, do all our research. We actually had to go get books and magazines and things. And so I went in search for information on budget weddings. And in the late 1990s, a budget wedding was about $12,000. Mark and I had about half that. So we figured out how we could cut corners and how we could actually have this wedding and have the people that we loved be a part of it. So there was an Episcopal priest in a Baptist church. The bride's gown came from a vintage consignment shop. The tuxedo was borrowed. The only thing that we really spent money on was our rings and the band, because that was what was important. But in all of the fervor and the hubbub, I remember Mark and I turning from the altar and looking at everyone who had gathered to celebrate this with us. And we saw friends from all walks of our life. And there were Black people and white people and brown people, and our Jewish friends had showed up, and our Buddhist friends had showed up, and all of the people in our lives who had walked along with us from high school to that point were present. And I remember thinking to myself in that moment, I think this is what heaven looks like. This is what heaven looks like. Jesus' first miracle at Cana, he has this dialogue with Mary, and this is the first time we're introduced to Mary in John's gospel, and he's like, "Woman, what does this have to do with me?" And she, like most mothers, are good at ignoring her son when he says nonsense, and said, "Just let him, he'll do it. Just do whatever he tells you." And the power of that is Jesus like, my hour has not yet come. In John's gospel, this message about Jesus' hour, which is about the glorification of God, it runs through the entire gospel. My hour has not yet come. In fact, when Jesus is at the Last Supper and he knows that his crucifixion is imminent, is when he says, the hour has come for God to be glorified. And that is God's glorification in this huge cosmic inversion of the universe where crucifixion is not the end, where death is not the end. God is glorified in resurrection, and God is glorified in small, everyday acts. You see, sometimes we can start to think that we can't make much difference in the world. Not many of us will have a national or world stage to stand on. Not many of us will gather crowds like Taylor Swift. Not many of us have the capacity for grandiosity, for huge acts. But every single one of us has the capacity for small acts of light. I'm going to quote to you from one of my favorite theological sources, which is The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. There's a quote that Gandalf says. He says, "Some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check, but that is not what I have found. It is in the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folks that keep the darkness at bay." It is the small, everyday deeds. Friends, there is so much division in this world. There is so much hatred. We as human beings always fall into the trap of us versus them. When there really is no them, there's only us. We fall into the trap of feeling like we need to be better than some other human being or group of human beings. And this Epiphany tide calls us to rethink that. Whenever we find it creeping up on us, this Epiphany tide reminds us that we carry the light of Christ, and that Christ's light is not just for you, it's not just for me, it's not just for Episcopalians, believe it or not. Christ's light is for the entire world. And it's not a light that we force on people. It's a light that we let shine in our lives so that people might see it and want it for themselves. So maybe you're not about writing legislation for marriage equality. But maybe you can go to a wedding and be present and celebrate love. Maybe you can't march in Selma. None of us can be Dr. King. But you can stand up for justice where you are. In your workplace, in the grocery store, you can be the voice of peace and justice with small things. Our God is a great God. Our God is an eternal God. Our God is a God of the cosmos, and that God comes here to be present with us. In the everyday, in the mundane, in the ordinary, in the banal, God is present. And it is our job to draw attention to that light, both within and without ourselves. To engage in everyday, in ordinary ways, in ordinary spaces, to love, to forgive, to welcome, to be generous, to offer to the world all of that which our God